It's a great honour and a privilege to introduce a very close and dear friend of mine for many years, Jake Shepherd. Jake is a Wits graduate. He studied BSc Electrical Engineering.
That's correct, yeah.
At Wits University.
Graduated in 1990.
In 1990.
Yeah.
Wits alumni, and Jake is also a world-renowned philatelist. We both...
I wouldn't say world-renowned, but I enjoy my philately.
Well, in my opinion, Jake is a world expert on the Cape of Good Hope for very good reason. Jake has a unique collection, something that is absolutely unique. Jake's late grandfather, Jack Shepherd, was really a world expert in the Cape of Good Hope. He specialized in the Cape of Good Hope triangles. He had a phenomenal collection. And he passed away in 1955, yeah. And in 1956, H.R. Homer, London, they sold the collection on auction in London in February the 20th, 1956. And Jake has done something that no one else has ever done. Jake,
so give a bit of an introduction to how it came about.
Absolutely. So I now turn over to Jake, and for our listeners out there and for the Wits alumni out there, it is a fascinating story. It's a unique story, and we're really proud of what you've done, not only in the memory of your grandfather, but your passion for the collection and for philately and your expertise. And really, you have such not only a love for philately, but you will hear this extraordinary story and this unique exhibit that Jake will be hopefully exhibiting soon. But his collection is something absolutely unique. So
thanks, Les. It's really great.
Without any further ado, we're going to hand over to Jake. So Jake, for our listeners out there, I'm sure everybody's now fascinated to know, what is this unique collection that you have developed?
Well, let's start at the beginning. So I think I grew up in Brackpan. I was actually third generation bar mitzvah in the Brackpan shul, interestingly enough. So my family's been in Brackpan for many years. And I always remember going to my gran in Brackpan and listening to Brahms and all sorts of other interesting music, but at the same time going through the old tins with stamps in it. My grandfather had this is the odds and sods that was left over from his collection. He had stamps in tins from Great Britain, from Tasmania, from all over the world, and I used to have a great time just going through them. And I think that's where the initial love of philately started for me.
You were a small child?
I was lucky. I was like 7, 8 years old. And I'd spend a Sunday, like often we'd spend time with my gran, and I'd spend Sundays just going through stamps and looking up the catalogues and trying to understand them a little bit. It was just a lot of fun. And it was actually being surrounded by some of these old, like serious stamp stuff. Like you had mercury, where the guys would actually use mercury in some of the stamp processes. You had mercury running around in some of the tins. It's before they found out that mercury was poisonous, etc. But they had magnifying glasses and all sorts of
tweezers
and
hinges,
all sorts of
everything.
All the paraphernalia that a normal philatelist would have. And I grew up with an initial, I suppose, interest and a love for stamps.
And a curiosity as well.
And a curiosity of stamps and how all these things worked and the sort of like weird and wonderful countries that didn't exist anymore, Tanganyika, etc.
Was your grandmother a philatelist as well?
Not at all. So my the reason the stamp collection was sold shortly after my late grandfather passed away is that my gran didn't know anything about stamps, and she felt that the fish moths would get to the stamps before anybody else would get to enjoy them. So she felt it was a duty to actually monetize the collection, sell the collection, and use the funds to look after her 3 sons. My father was 10 years old at the time, and so she decided she was going to sell the collection.
And I think also by selling it, other people that would be very interested in collecting Cape of Good Hope would have an opportunity to purchase and to improve their collections.
Sure. And I always remember growing up, it's almost with, I suppose, the myth and lore, family lore, that my grandfather had this amazing collection of Cape of Good Hope items that was sold. So I always had this myth of the Great Shepherd collection at the back of my mind.
Was your father also interested in philately?
My father, not at all, not really.
And any of
I
your
was
siblings?
the only person interested in philately, and my siblings weren't, my cousins weren't. So it was something that skipped a generation. So none of my uncles were really that interested, and the only one that actually fell into the disease called philately was myself.
Or rather, the passion for
the passion. Other people call it disease, I suppose, but a passion for philately. And about 30 years ago, when I was still quite young,
still are young, but when you were younger,
when I was younger, late teenager, I said to my dad, I think stamps is could be a very nice way of putting aside money from an investment point of view. But I said more than that. I felt it would be a great opportunity to perpetuate my late grandfather's memory if we collected Cape of Good Hope, because every time then when we're looking at items to purchase and we see a Cape of Good Hope item, it gives us an opportunity to speak about our late grandfather, my late grandfather, and my father's father. My father didn't really get a huge chance to know, with him being 10 years old at the time. And it's actually over the last 30 years, it's been a great opportunity
and
for my dad and I just to remember his father.
Specifically, did you specialize in triangles, the Cape of Good Hope?
Just Cape of Good Hope triangulars.
Not the rectangulars or the...
My late grandfather had rectangulars in his collection, but the iconic part of his collection was the triangulars, and we always felt that it would be so nice to actually, collect Cape triangulars for that purpose. And it's worked out really well.
Okay, so what makes you very unique is that, and if we could mention to our listeners, that you have actually obtained items from your late grandfather's.
Yes. So I think what actually happened is the passion went from just collecting any old Cape of Good Hope triangulars to having the lookout for items that belonged to my late grandfather. And it's one of those, I suppose many people have told me in the philately world that I'm a little bit mad, because looking for specific items that were part of a particular collection it's looking for the needle in the proverbial needle in a haystack, but it's actually worse than that. It's much of needles in lots of haystacks, but there's only one needle in all the haystacks.
That's so true.
And it's a really difficult thing to do. And I've, for the last 30 years, I've been keeping an eye out. I mean, I suppose only the last 12 or 13 years seriously keeping an eye out for my late grandfather's items, but over a period of 30 years keeping an eye out for my late grandfather's items, and only having the joy of once, maybe twice a year, finding an item, and actually having the joy of finding something that you looking through a catalogue and you spot it and you say, wow, I think that's it, and going and checking against the catalogue, and then actually confirming that that's the item and throwing a little, having a little party, I suppose, each time you find an item, because it's that rare an occasion.
So Jake, can I ask, you have, I think it's very very special, the catalogue that you have, the original catalogue from February the 20th, 1956.
Yeah.
How did you obtain it? I mean, it's in
I've got about 3 or 4 of them, and that's the beauty of eBay. So for many years, I actually put standard searches in eBay's for this specific catalogue, and occasionally, so the first time I actually saw that somebody had one. I didn't get to the auction on eBay. So it's an interesting story in and of itself. I'd lost this item, and I realized, sure, but I don't have a Jack Shepherd catalogue. I really want one, and I can see there's this particular user on eBay that won this. And in those days, in the early days of eBay, you could see which users won a particular item.
Right.
Today you can't. But I then seen that this user had actually bought an item from Julian Gaselta.
Who was a South
African stamp dealer.
A mutual,
and he's a mutual friend of
ours.
ours. Yeah. And so I actually called Julian, and I said, Julian, who is this guy that bought this item from you? He told me who he was, and he gave me his contact details. And I got in contact with this guy who lives in Essex in England, and I basically said to him, whatever you'd like me to pay you, I'm happy to pay, but I really like that catalogue.
Jake, can I just ask, growing up, did you know that there was a catalogue?
Sure, I knew there was a catalogue. There was a very flimsy paper. In those days when catalogues were produced, they were produced in two different, let's say, call it qualities. You had a high quality catalogue with like a cardboard page, which this one is. And then you had a very, very flimsy, almost like half the paper thickness of normal paper that you would have today that you put in your printer, flimsy photocopy. And we had that flimsy reproduction in our family. But because it was flimsy, you didn't have a good impression of the item. So it was it's quite faded, and you can't read. The pictures weren't clear, so you couldn't really make out.
But you knew that a good copy existed.
I knew a good copy existed. And when I saw this item that had been won by somebody else, I actually contacted the person. I said, "Listen, this is the scenario. I'm very happy to purchase it from you." And he actually just sent it to me. He said, "No, you don't owe me anything." And it was a really, really nice gesture. And it was a gesture that really touched me. Many years later, it turns out, the two of us were actually bidding for another catalogue. Because actually one of the things I have is I actually also collect all the old catalogues from all the old great collections. And you need to do that if you want to understand anything in philately. And there was a particularly difficult to find catalogue by A.H. West. I think it was about 1950. I can't remember the exact date. It was in the 60s or the 50s, and I had eventually managed to find this catalogue, and I realised that the two of us were bidding against each other, and I had a special bidding program that at the last second would put like quite a high bid. So he didn't know that I was outbidding him, and at the last second I nabbed this item.
It was called sniper, something like
the sniping. You'd snipe the, and because the reason I wanted to do it because I decided I wanted to repay the favour.
Wow.
And so he was actually quite cross because he said if he had known that I was going to be bidding that, he would have outbid me and he would have got the item. So I said, yeah, that's how things work. And like a week later, I'd contacted the seller of the item and it said, listen, you do know who this guy is because I see you've sold stuff to him in the past. I said, please send this catalogue to...
You repaid him?
I repaid him in another catalogue. He was very excited. He didn't know, he was like quite taken aback that I'd done that. But I said, listen, it's just repayment in kind. Wow. You gave me something that was very precious to me. I wanted to give you something that was very precious.
Jake, I have to admit, philatelists are a special breed. There's no question about it.
We are. Dying breed.
But it was very nice what you did. It was.
But he's a great guy. He's a great guy, and I felt it was something I wanted to do.
Did you ever manage to get that same catalogue again?
Yes, so I've actually managed to win about 3 others.
Okay.
So over the years, you put in offers when they come up. Literally, they don't come up very often, and I've managed to buy 3 others. One of them for a ridiculous amount of money, because just I wanted it. So I landed up paying almost $100 for this old catalogue. But yeah, so you can find stuff on eBay, and it's actually a great place to find good stuff. I've even found one of my late grandfather's items on eBay, funnily enough.
So can you relate to our listeners? How did you get your first item? And how was your reaction when you actually obtained it?
So the first item, the first significant item, was a item that was addressed to Saul Solomon. And Saul Solomon was the government printer in the Cape of Good Hope in the 1860s. And when the government in the Cape ran out of the stamps that were issued from and shipped from Britain, they'd actually misplaced them. But they didn't know where they were. They were sitting in a warehouse somewhere. But the fact, for all intents and purposes, they were running out of stamps. They turned to the government printer at the time, who was Saul Solomon. Now, Saul Solomon, interestingly enough, was the son of Benjamin Solomon, who is, as far as I understand, was the first Jew ever to settle in the Cape. Yeah, so I don't know the exact connection, but he was one of the early. And he was a very famous parliamentarian. He was actually quite dwarfish in nature. I think he suffered from polio as a kid, and as a result, he was very small in stature. But he was great in stature as well, because he was one of the most respected parliamentarians. He was anti-slavery. He started off the Argus. He started off Old Mutual. He was one of the shareholders in Old Mutual in the early days, and he was a parliamentarian. He was a really a person who took part in the politics in the Cape and tried to make the Cape and the broader South Africa a better place for everybody. And he really had everybody's best interests in mind. He was a really special chap. And anyway, there was this item that my late grandfather had, which is addressed to Saul Solomon while he was on business in London. And this is an item that it was iconic in that it was an envelope, so envelopes are scarcer, and it was in nice bold print. And if you actually, I don't know if your camera will be able to see it, and you might be able to zoom in on it, but it was this item here, and it was an item that I had seen in his catalogue. And I then saw this at a Spink auction, and I was a bit of a noob. I didn't really know what I was doing, so I'd asked one of the stamp dealer that we knew if she could actually place a bid. She was going to be at the auction on my behalf, and she said, "Well, what price must I go up to?" And I said, "I don't care, just go." Just pay whatever. And it was. I can't remember the exact price that the catalogue was initially, estimated, or that envelope was estimated to be. I think she most probably went 5 or 6 times over that.
But you managed to win.
But we managed to win that item, and that was such a high when I found out that I'd won that item.
But I think also for our listeners, and it's interesting for non-philatelists, Saul Solomon was very involved in the printing of the Cape of Good Hope.
Sure, he was. So during when they ran out of stamps, they had to print the provisional issues in 1861, which are the so-called woodblocks, and which are actually one of the gems of Cape Philately, all the woodblocks, and specifically the areas of colour,
also World Philately.
And World Philately.
Yeah. They are amongst the rarities of World Philately.
And that Saul Solomon was the printer who printed those woodblocks. So he's as a persona, he's wrapped up in the history of Cape Philately, and that's why that the cover for me was so iconic, and why I really wanted it. And it was just an immense amount of joy when I found out that I'd won this item. And I suppose that adrenaline rush and that an enjoyment that I got from that actually set me on a path for saying, well, what other items can I get? And over the years, many people have come up to me and they've said, look, here's an item, it's ex-Jack Shepherd. And it's turned out that it hasn't been an ex-Jack Shepherd. Why? And the only reason you can actually know what is and what isn't is if it belongs in the catalogue. Mm-hmm. It was. And if it didn't appear in the catalogue, chances are it wasn't. I think for me, because I started collecting ex-Jack Shepherd items, I actually started having an enjoyment and an interest in all ex,
the provenance from
all the other collectors. So all the other major Cape triangular collectors, and so Sir Maxwell Joseph, the Dale Lichtenstein collection, A.H. West, Schofield. There are lots and lots of tremendous.
It's one of the most popular fields of serious philately.
For sure. And as a result, I now have an interest in all provenance of all Cape items. And what's quite fascinating is you start getting a feel for where the items went from which collection to which collection to which collection. So you start getting to know, well, who was collecting over a particular period of time. And therefore, from a provenance point of view, let's say they passed away and it landed up in the estate of their children, and therefore no items were added to that collection, and a similar thing happened to another collection at the same time, you then know for a fact there could never be any items that were the ex-provenance of the one collector and the other collector. And I've actually seen people claiming provenance of both collections, and I know for a fact that could never have happened. So I've actually found that that's also been an interesting part of the collection of collecting Cape Good Hope. I think the other thing, just from an intellectual pursuit, it's always nice to be an expert in something. But in order to be an expert in something, that field has to be very, very small, because otherwise it's incredibly difficult to know all there is to know. And for me, it's been a bit of a passion of mine to become an expert of Cape of Good Hope, which is actually just one country, and it's an 11-year period. From 1850s to it's 1853 to 1864, and that's it. That's the period.
And it's one specific part of Cape.
And it's one specific part, and that's it. So to try and becoming an expert in an 11-year period in one little stamp issuing authority is quite a daunting task, and you need a lot of books, and you need to read through a lot of stuff. And I've actually enjoyed that part of it as well.
And I think also from all the years that we've been in contact with each other, you mentioned that you also had a wonderful relationship with other collectors of Cape, where you've shared your knowledge, and you've met many people along the way, and you've helped each other.
Sure. So I've just, over the years, I suppose as part of the passion, I had an opportunity to meet the great Franco Frescura, who he wrote a set of books on the post offices from 1792, I think it was, to the early 1900s, 19 to 1910. And he's got an extensive knowledge. I happened to meet with him, and I met with Lutz Hefferman, who was the author of the South African Colour Catalogue, because he had a phenomenal,
wonderful
absolutely brilliant Cape collection. And I had an opportunity to see his Cape collection, and I had a few interesting chats and interesting disagreements with him as well over a particular item. I remember there was a disagreement we had over a particular item, whether it was a forgery or not. And the two of us had a really lively discussion, but it's been an interesting journey through the whole process as well. So I've enjoyed it. It's been very much a side hobby of my life, but it's been an enjoyable aspect of my life.
And Jake, could you share with us some other items from your late grandfather's collection?
Sure. So we can. I don't know if you want to actually come across the table,
or if you can show them, and then I'll zoom in.
All right. Okay. Cool. So I think maybe just start. Let's actually start here. At one stage, I'd actually, and I need to update this, I'd actually mounted and produced an exhibition of all the items, not just my late grandfather's, but I titled it the Jack Shepherd Collection. And on this page, it's just showing, I suppose now you can see what a Cape of Good Hope looks like. This is actually a plate proof, a pair. And actually, one of the things that I love about Cape of Good Hope items is the stamp engraving is phenomenal. It's one of the most intricate stamp engraved, line engraved stamps that you'll find. And actually, the John Easton said it is difficult to escape the conclusion that in the stamp, the craftsmanship of the stamp engraver reached its highest peak.
That's so true. Could you mention for our listeners what is a plate proof?
Okay, so essentially what would happen when they were producing the plates for the line engraved stamps is they'd actually produce a master die, which is one item, one stamp in metal, and then they would actually transfer the image of that onto a cylinder, and then use that cylinder to produce a die pair in the Cape of whether it's a pair of items from that master die, and then they'd use that pair to create another roller to impress the image onto a plate of stamps, and then they'd actually have a plate of 240 stamps. Now that was called a plate, and that went through a hardening process, and then they used those plates initially when they were testing the plate to see what, if they needed to correct anything, and if the images, if all the impressions were correct, they'd actually print a plate of the items, print a sheet of the items from that plate, and they printed it initially in the 1 penny case in black. So it wasn't issued in black, but it was the first impression from the initial plate. So this is a very, very crisp image taken from the plate before any wear had taken place, etc., and it's in black, and it's a really good image. And there are a few other plate proofs that I've got here. None of these belong to my late grandfather, but she has 1 pennies and 4 penny and 1 shilling. And then I had an interesting piece here, because these are modern die proofs. And modern die proofs were printed from about 1900 to about 1920 by De La Rue. and the people, I suppose the salesmen, would go around showing their,
because they're sample copies.
They're sample copies. And one of the things that they do, so these two here, which is this weird half impression of a 1 shilling and a 6 shilling next to each other, are from the pear dies. They didn't have the plates anymore. Plates were destroyed, but they had pear dies, and they printed off these off the pear dies. And interestingly enough, my late grandfather had an item listed that matched this description exactly. And this is the only item I've ever seen that matches that description. So there's a very high probability
that it could be
this could be my late grandfather's. It also it went into a collection afterwards, which was a collector known to have bought items from my late grandfather. So the chances
there's
are
a high probability.
There's a high probability this is part of my late grandfather's collection. Then in terms of, these are the first stamps, the 1 penny, brick red on blued paper. The bluing is actually a side effect. When they used fugitive inks, they used inks that would run if you try to wash off the cancellation. But they used some sort of a cyanide mixture, what they call a ferrocyanide, or a different type of admixture to the ink, which would actually dye. It actually had the effect of bluing the paper. So often the initial stamps that you find have a blue tinge to them, and certainly when you look at the back of them, you see they call it an ivory head, and they actually across all of the British Commonwealth stamps, the early Commonwealth stamps, have this ivory head of the initial stamps until they got the fugitive ink formula correct, and then it didn't cause the bluing of the paper. But this was another item that I managed to pick up, which is also part of my late grandfather's collection, was this pear here, which also was quite excited when I found that.
It's amazing. If we just zoom in into some of the stamps, I mean, they're over 100 years old, and
150, yeah.
They look absolutely in pristine condition, in mint condition. They look phenomenal, just as if when they were sold on the day of sale.
Yeah,
they haven't worn, they haven't faded.
So the quality of look, all the paper was handmade paper.
Yeah.
The ink, they obviously used proper inks, and
it was art.
It was art. This is a real art, and these items have, they're not fading, they're not changing color. To some extent, they do. But on the whole, they're pretty robust items. I suppose also helpful that I'm living up in the Highveld here, in the dry climate, because nothing, you don't have the fox marks, and you don't have a lot of the moisture in the air that in other places you have. So this item here was also part of my late grandfather's collection, and what was notable about this one actually was an item that was in a Spink sale. It was a part of the Dr. James Foyt collection. And they were asking a ridiculous amount of money for it, so I didn't bid on it. And then it didn't sell, and I actually wrote to David Parsons, and I said, David Parsons, this is an item that should have been listed around about £3,000, and you had listed it about £8,000. Wow. And I said, it's way too high. Your estimate was so high that there's no ways that this item would ever have sold. And the reason this is a special item, by the way, is because it's a redirect cover. And it's something that Les actually informed me a little bit about redirects. It's where you send an envelope from a particular country to a destination country, and then they have to redirect the cover because the person wasn't there at the destination, and then they have to put a stamp, in this case of Britain, in order to redirect it. But what's really interesting about this cover is it was then sent in another envelope to Malta, because the person they thought was in Malta, and it was sent back from Malta. And the back of this item is a back stamp from Malta back to England. So this item went halfway around the world, and it's philatelically speaking, it's a very interesting piece because of that. But what actually happened is subsequently Spink put it on a sale, and I managed to pick it up for less than £3,000.
Good for you.
And David Parsons actually remembered that whole incident. He saw me quite a few years later. He said, "Weren't you the guy who told me that this was overpriced?" And I said, "Yes, I was the guy." But it was quite nice to have that. But it was really great to actually get this item in the end.
That's wonderful.
Being part of my late grandfather's collection. Then there's some other interesting pieces. We can go through the next lot, and this page is interesting because I enjoy coloured cancellations, and coloured cancellations are very unusual with capes. My grandfather had quite a few coloured cancellations. Unfortunately, very few of those were ever photographed, so I don't know which specific colour cancels he had.
And in the catalogue, they'd mention the colour.
So they only photographed 99 items. The majority of the items weren't photographed. But in the description, when you read the item's description, they'll say, with the scarce red cancellation. And so red cancellations are scarce, blue are scarcer still, and green are very, very uncommon. So very rare. But I love the coloured cancellations, and I'm a sucker for them. Now, what happened? So these items. This is the famous Saul Solomon cover, which started the whole thing. As you can see, what was quite interesting, besides the fact that it was sent to Saul Solomon while he was in Cape Town, the other interesting fact is that this was a very early cover. On the back of this envelope, it says that it was received in London on the 12th of December 1853. Now, these items were only initially issued on the 1st of September 1853. So chances are that this was posted in November 1853, because it would take about a month to get to the Cape.
They'd have to go by ship.
Yeah. So this was about 2 months after the Cape items were issued, which is a very early use.
Extremely early.
Very early use. And the problem with Cape triangulars, there's no such thing as a first day cover. Yeah. And the reason there's no such thing as a first day cover is because they never had date stamps in September 1853. They were only introduced in December of 1853. So we don't really have the earliest known cover or a first day cover of Cape of Good Hope stamps. But this is a very early use, and that's one of the things that's pretty interesting about it. This piece here, this is when Saul Solomon produced the woodblocks. These are woodblocks on this page. And this particular woodblock here is 1 penny vermilion, and it's an outstanding copy. One of the best collections, most extensive collections ever put together was the Sir Maxwell Joseph collection. And this is by far the nicest item out of all the Sir Maxwell Joseph items.
This is the provenance of Sir Maxwell Joseph.
This is Sir Maxwell Joseph. So it went from Jack Sheppard to C. Emerson Houston, which is one of the collectors that actually was known to have bought items from my late grandfather's collection, and then into Sir Maxwell Joseph's collection.
And we can see amazing margins.
Amazing margins, very light cancellation. The parallel bars cancellation, which is quite unusual, is actually a Grahamstown cancellation. It was only ever employed in Grahamstown. And as you can see, it's actually quite light when you compare it to the triangular cancellation that we have here and here. These actually mark up the item quite significantly, whereas the parallel bars are very light, and they leave the item mostly untouched. And this is one of the finest known used 1 penny vermilions. And interestingly enough, this was the item that got the highest value in my late grandfather's auction.
That item?
That item. So when it sold, this was the creme de la creme.
Do you remember how much it sold for back in...
I think it was £180.
But in those days...
In 1956.
In 1956, it was a lot of money.
Yeah, it was 100, yeah. So for me, I was really excited when I actually managed to track this item down as well. So I think out of those... And then subsequently, the pieces I'm going to show you now are a whole bunch of pieces that over the years, after I've put the write-up together, we started actually finding a few more items. And you'll notice a lot of these I actually bought from Spink. And this was a really nice block of 4. It's a De La Rue to later. So the Perkins Baton was printed, the initial printings. This is a 6 penny mauve by De La Rue, and this was printed in about 1863.
Those were the two printing houses, the main...
The two printing houses. And many of these are actually, you can find, these are far more, the later printings, the De La Rue printings, you find far more mint copies than you would find of the Perkins Bacon. This one here, I actually only picked up last year. I saw it on an auction. And I immediately, what I've done, because I've stared at my grandfather's catalogue for so long, these the images of these pieces have been burnt into the back of my retina.
amazing.
So when I spotted it, I knew immediately this is a Jack Shepherd item. Got very excited.
And was it mentioned as a Jack Shepherd
No.
item?
This one certainly wasn't.
So-
Virtually almost none of the items are mentioned as Jack Shepherd items. All of them are through image recognition.
So because of your passion
Because of my
for,
passion, I can spot the items.
and because of your affinity for obtaining something from your late grandfather, so you managed to achieve and to receive items that other people,
Yeah,
have missed.
I've bought items on eBay. We have spotted the item on eBay, and I've said, "Oh, that looks like my late grandfather's." I've bought it, and then I told the dealer who I bought it from, who knows of my insane quest. I said to him,
Unique, it's a unique.
I said, "Do you realize this was part of my late grandfather's collection?" He was kicking himself because he's on the lookout for stuff that was part of my late grandfather's items. This one, because he could have charged me a bit more.
Yeah.
But
I'm sure most people, most philatelists, and I'm nearly 100% sure, are very happy that you're managing to
Sure,
achieve your goal.
sure.
That you manage, because it's a unique. Where would you ever get anywhere where a grandchild would actually purchase items that the grandfather once had?
yeah,
It's a wonderful. It just makes the hobby come alive, and it shows the significance.
sure.
And each piece, it's not just a stamp; it's part of your history, part of your you touching something that your grandfather had.
And that has a lot of sentimental value.
Tremendous.
Huge thing. You'll notice actually both of these items. This is also part of my late grandfather's collection. But both of these items, interestingly enough, you'll notice there are 4 1-penny stamps,
Yeah.
which is the local rate for internal envelopes, internal mail. Now, so the question is, why don't they just use a 4-penny blue stamp? And that's what they would normally do. But this was in the early 1861, when they were running out of the 4-penny stamps, and they resorted to using 1-penny stamps.
Wow.
So this is part of the shortage that led to the printing of the woodblocks. So both of these are illustrations of the shortage of the 4-penny stamp.
So Jake, not only do you collect, but you part of history. You actually you're contributing to the history of the Cape and the whole system. What happened?
It's interesting just to find about, like, what are the postal rates? Why did postal rates change, or why did they use 4 1-pennies? It's all of that sort of information, which is part of, I suppose, the joy of collecting.
Did your grandfather ever exhibit?
He did. I've actually seen quite a few of the trophies that he got. I think the highest he ever got was a Vermeil, interestingly enough. And I seem to have misplaced the trophies. Otherwise, I would have shown you what the trophies looked like. But he had quite a few trophies from his exhibits.
And were they national or international?
No, they were national. There were no international exhibits. He exhibited nationally. And I think actually he only, if I'm not mistaken, he probably only collected for a period of about 8 or 9 years, because he passed away at a very young age. He passed away at the age of 46. So he didn't actually have that long a time to put together a significant collection. He was on the way to putting together really one of the outstanding
world class. Really,
it was starting to become world class. It was a really interesting collection. Now this item, which is looks a bit untidy, the margins are a bit thin, etc. But we mentioned Julian Gesselter earlier. So Julian came past my house. Is this right?
Oh, that's much better, yeah.
Okay. So Julian came past my house and he said to me, I've got some nice items, I want to show them to you. And I had a look at the items, and there was 1 or 2 really nice items, and I was interested in those. And then I said, well, let me just continue looking through. And I said, wait, Julian, this is my late grandfather's.
Wow.
And I went and showed him the catalogue, and I showed him which lot it was. And then I said to him, well, actually, I'm now at your mercy, because I have to buy this item from you, and you can set the price. And testimony to actually what a mensch Julian really is. He charged me the price that he'd normally charge anybody for it.
Well, I must tell you, in the stamp world, for our listeners out there, and I really do want to mention that I've known Julian also for maybe over more than 40 years.
Yeah.
He's honest. He's exceptionally honest, and we use the word mensch. He really is a real gentleman, and he could have charged you whatever. And you would have paid whatever.
And smiled.
But that's the way that he's always conducted his personal and his business life. He's really he's a true gentleman.
Yes.
And he has a wonderful name, and a lot of people, when you see it, a lot is based on trust.
Sure.
And it's just so wonderful to hear these stories, because he really could have put any price.
Sure. And I would have happily paid.
But it was also very nice of you to be so honest with him, to mention that it was from your late grandfather. You could have kept quiet, and
I knew who I was dealing with.
It just shows
so when you know who you're dealing
the caliber
with, you can actually just be yourself.
And I'm sure he was very happy that he enabled you to obtain.
He was really, really excited.
We're all very happy for you.
It's excited for me. Now, actually, this is an interesting one. I don't think this is part of my late grandfather's collection, but this one was. And also, it was one of those, when I was looking at a catalogue late one night, going through it on my cell phone, I spotted it and I said, this is my late grandfather's. And it's what's really interesting about this one is you just see a piece in the catalogue, you just see a portion of it.
That's not the whole envelope.
It's not the whole envelope, but because I've actually know exactly what everything looks like, I managed to suss out that this was my late grandfather's.
And what's interesting as well, that catalogue, it was black and white.
It's black and white, and in fact, actually, it'll be interesting just to show you that item, hidden, tucked away. And if you actually look here, tucked away there, and that is the item.
That's amazing.
So you can actually see it.
Jake, that's really,
But you don't realise how difficult it is to spot it when you've only seen
when you have only part of
the envelope in the catalogue,
and
then you see it in real life, and the full item, the item without any obfuscations, without being behind anything else, comes to life, and it's a joy just seeing the full item for the first time as well.
And it comes to life. It actually
comes to life, and then you actually get this is actually an entire, and what an entire means is that it's not only the envelope. Actually, the envelope is the letter. In those days, they didn't have envelopes; they had letters, and they would fold the letters in such a way that it would appear like an envelope. So this is an entire with the whole letter written in High Dutch, and it's been a struggle to try and translate it, but I've enjoyed trying to translate it.
And look, the condition is superb.
And the condition is absolutely superb. Yeah. Now this is another item, belongs to my late grandfather. It was a block of 6 pale rose lilac. Not very good condition, but at the end of the day, this was actually part of the late Lutz Hefferman's collection. And I spotted it when I was actually sitting going through the collection at Lutz's place. I spotted it as an extra.
And you mentioned to Lutz.
Mentioned to Lutz. But basically, when his collection was put on sale, quite a few years later, unfortunately, he was murdered. Yeah. And when his wife put his collection on sale, then I managed to get this.
In which auction house did they auction?
I think this was Spink. Yeah, I think this was Spink.
I also managed to see his collection.
Well, might not be Spink. Yeah, it is Spink.
I saw his collection he exhibited it, and I used to go to the exhibitions and I saw it. It was a superb collection.
Yeah, it was great.
But it's wonderful that you've actually got items from your late grandfather that were in his gold collection as well.
I've got many items from Lutz's collection because Lutz, like myself, loved coloured cancellations. So the two of us were so all the interesting coloured cancellations, not all, significant number of coloured cancellations that I managed to pick up were actually from Lutz's collection.
And he managed to obtain a gold.
Yeah, nice.
A few gold awards.
These two were quite interesting because this is a pair, vermilion, that was part of my late grandfather's collection. I think I won this at a David Feldman auction. This one actually is one of the, in my opinion, is the finest used 1 penny, what they call it, it's the rarest of the shades. It's a brick red shade, pale brick red shade, because normally you have carmine and you have vermilion, but this is the rarest of the 1 penny shades, and it's a really fine example. This is also part of my late grandfather's collection. This item here also was just a block of 4 1 penny probably the same sort of period as the 1861s, running out of running out of 4-penny stamps. But this is part of my late grandfather's collection, and this one too, actually, I spotted was in a Spink auction. Also part of my late grandfather's collection. And actually, what I did is I showed my dad. I said to him, "Here's the Spink catalogue, and here is your late father's catalogue. I'm telling you, there's a common item on both of those pages. You just go find it." And I've showed you the pages. So maybe like 15, 20 items on a page in the Spink one, and about 15, 20 items in my late grandfather's one. And I said to my dad, "Right, you go find it." And my dad couldn't find the two matching up. Why? Because the item was at a different orientation. So the Spink item was in orientation 1, was like, let's say, upright, and my late grandfather's was inverted. So my father couldn't match up, even though he knew there was a common item. So I suppose it just highlights how difficult it actually is to try and find items over the years which match.
Well, Jake, I must tell you, it's been absolutely fascinating. And I think it really, as I said in the beginning, it is unique what you've done. It really is. And your passion, it's so evident. And your love for not only the hobby, but for obtaining items that belong to your grandfather. It's really heartwarming. It's something really so lovely to see and to witness, and to see the magnificent items, the specimens that you have shown. It's just absolutely unbelievable. Not only in value, but in every sense. Historical, that it has so much significance for your family. My advice, and I think I've been saying this to you for a long time, you have to exhibit it as a one frame, because it is unique. And today in international exhibitions, one frame really it is a major part of all international exhibitions, and it's become very popular. But your collection, your exhibit, and you do have enough material, is something that is really unique. And I think it would be wonderful, not only for the memory of your late grandfather, for Jack Shepherd, but for people to admire not only your research, your perseverance, your passion. It will come through in that exhibit.
So thank you, Les. I really appreciate the advice that you've given.
So we just wish you
I'm just looking for one or two others that will really round it off really nicely.
And then you'll put it into a one frame,
yeah.
And then you'll exhibit it internationally, and people will really get the opportunity to enjoy and see the fruits of your labor. I mean, this is over 30 years of something that you really enjoy, you have a tremendous passion for. It's very evident. And it's very significant as well. So Jake, it's been such a wonderful experience. All the years also asking your advice on various stamps that people have shown me, and I've always asked. You've always been willing to share your knowledge. I think that's a beautiful thing, that you always prepare to impart your knowledge onto others and to help others. And may you continue to have this burning passion that you really have, and may you be successful in obtaining as many items as you can, and may you be able to impart this love that you have to your children and grandchildren, and that the hobby of philately will continue in your family for many generations to come.
Thanks, Les.
So we really thank you, and we are very proud of you, and we just wish you all the very best.